Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be showing you a fantastic method of painting the Death Korps of Krieg for Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop. And to do so, the colour scheme we picked out is for the 143rd Siege Regiment, which is that classic bluish-grey colour scheme that they're so well known for. Now if you want to paint your soldiers as a different regiment, then this guide is still going to work well for you. All you need to do is swap out the colours for the greatcoat to the one relevant to the colour scheme that you want to do. But aside from that, all the same stages and techniques will work just fine. So we hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you at the desk. To paint your Death Korps of Krieg soldiers, the first thing you need to do is to undercoat your miniatures. And for all the colours we're going to be using in this video, the ideal starting point is a grey undercoat. So in this case, I've gone for Mechanicus Standered grey spray from Citadel, but you could also use uniform grey from the Army Painter. The choice really is yours. But this is a great starting point for those colours, and also is the perfect colour to start out painting the trousers too. So that's one base coat already done. But what we're going to do here for the manual painting is to start out with the main colour of the uniform, which is of course that bluish grey greatcoat. Now the colour I've picked out for base coating this is the Fang, and to base coat it what you need is a medium to large size brush. So I've got a regiment brush here from the Army Painter for this. And all you got to do is, as ever, get some of the paint onto your palette in a little dollop like that, and thin it down with a touch of water to make sure it's nice and smooth, so it doesn't clog any detail and also gives you lots of control as to where exactly it's going. And once you've got that prepared and brought down to about this consistency, all you got to do is start base coating in that greatcoat. So we're looking at, for all this kind of area around here, just blocking the entire thing, only being careful when we get close to the trousers. So just take your time being neat as you go around there. But as for the rest of the detail, don't worry about it at this stage. If you happen to catch some of it, it's not a problem, because we'll neaten up as we add further base coats onto the miniature. Once you've finished base coating the greatcoat, we can then move on to our next base coat, and this one is going to be Karak Stone for a few select details on the miniature, which are all a little bit smaller than what we've been doing so far. So for this, switch to a smaller brush. I've gone down to a medium layer from Citadel here for that, a little bit more accuracy, a little bit more control. Now getting the paint ready is identical to what we did in that previous step, just thinning it down with that touch of water to make sure it's about this kind of consistency here, and then just twist the brush on the palette like that, just remove excess paint and bring the bristles to a nice point as well. And with this, first of all, what we need to do is to block in the signature gas mask. So we're looking at this area around here. All you need to do is paint all this in, just being careful of the greatcoat, but not worrying about anything else at the moment. Now you can see the colour's a little bit translucent, so just allow it to completely dry and then apply a second thin coat in the exact same way. And in addition, there's a few other bits to pick out at this stage too, and that includes the puttees, which are these kind of bindings on top of the boots, so this area down here. And also we just need to block in the bedroll that's on top of the backpack around here. With that done, we can now move on to our next three base coats on the miniature, and for this we need to start out with a dark brown for the boots. So here I'm going to use some Rhinox Hide, but really any kind of dark brown will do. After that we need to pick out the webbing, and here we need to go for a warmer, more kind of medium brown, so I'm going to use some Mornfang Brown for this. And then finally we need to base coat some black details, and here we're going to go for an off black, which we can shade down later. So in this case I'm going to go for some Corvus Black. But first of all we need Rhinox Hide, and to apply it I'm sticking to that medium layer brush, and for this part it's very easy for this one. All you got to do is, as ever, get that paint thin down on your palette, just making sure it's smooth, and once you've done so, all you got to do is block in the boots. So as you're painting this, it's just a matter of painting in this area down here, just being careful of the puttees when you get close to them. With those boots done, we're now ready to move on to a medium brown. So in this case, I'm using Mornfang Brown, and this is for all of the webbing. Now, some of this can be quite tricky to get to, so be sure to change brush size as you need to. I'm starting out with a medium layer from Citadel for this, but it's always good to have a smaller one on hand. Now, this will include this part on the front of the body here for the gas mask, so all this part around here. In addition, on the pack, be sure to get the leather parts of this too. So, for example, this part in the middle just here. And finally, we need to base coat the black details using Corvus Black. Now this, first of all, is going to be his rifle, so we want to make sure we're painting the entire thing. But in addition, there's a few other details to do at this stage too. This includes his gloves, so we want to paint these areas in just here. Also the pipe coming out of the gas mask, so all the way down here, all the way down to this kind of part at the base just there. Just being really careful around the greatcoat as you do this. In addition, there's kind of a hood that's hidden away behind the gas mask as well. Only a small part visible just around here, but be sure to get that as well. With that, we've now nearly finished applying the initial base coat to the miniature. We just need to add some metallics before moving on to our wash on the model. And so for this, for the silver details, we need some iron hand steel, and then we're going to pick out some details in brass. And for this, what we need is some Balthazar Gold. But first of all, I'm going to use some iron hand steel, and to apply it, I'm sticking to that medium layer brush. And with this, what we need to do is pick out a fair few little silver details on here, including the armor and also the metal that appears on his rifle. So just take your time working around the miniature, picking these parts out. But we're looking for initially the helmet and the shoulder pads. So we're looking at this kind of area around here, just blocking it in, being really careful when we get close to the details. And that is especially true when it comes to the smaller silver areas. So for example, on the gas mask, you can see there's a little bit of silver on there. Just really take your time as you pick these kind of areas out. Just really carefully along there like that. In addition, be sure to get all the silver details on the weapon as well, including the barrel of it, all these kind of coils that appear along the side of the rifle. Once you've found all that silver, you're then ready to move on to Balthazar Gold, and this is for any little aquillas that you can find on the miniature. So for example, this design we've got on the helmet, but in addition, be sure to get the skull that appears on the side of the rifle as well. With that, we've now finished applying our base coats onto the miniature and can move on to applying a wash to it. And for the Dour and Grim Deathcore, the perfect kind of colour to use here is a dark brown. So I'm going to use some Agrax Earthshade, and this can shade everything at the same time in one go. So a nice and convenient way of doing these. It's great for when you're painting an army of them and you want to do them quickly as well. So to apply it, what you need to do is go for a larger brush. I'm using a monster brush from the Army Painter for this. And what I like to do is to build up a puddle on the palette to draw from to control exactly how much I'm putting on at once. But you could go straight from the pot if you're feeling a little bit braver. I find this just gives a little bit more control though. And once you've done so, all you've got to do is paint this directly all over the miniature. So pick a starting point, for example, around here, just apply it and just move that wash around so it runs into all that recessed detail and gives you lots of definition. Now, when you're applying this quantity of wash onto a miniature, just bear in mind it can collect and pool in particular areas, and if you don't keep your eye on it, it can look a little bit unpleasant when it dries. So we're looking for areas where it would catch. So, for example, we're looking at parts such as the bottom of the coat just down here, where you can find as if a lot of it goes on there. If I just get a little bit more and put it on there, you can see it can really start to collect in areas like that corner just there. So if you spot that happening, just move it around and redistribute it elsewhere around the miniature so it ends up a little bit more like that before you leave it to dry. Now when you're applying this quantity of wash to a miniature, it will take quite a while to dry, so be sure to leave the miniature for about 45 minutes before you move on to the next stage. The wash is now completely dry, and you can see all that definition it gives onto the miniature, making all that detail stand out nicely. But before we move on to the next step of layering the miniature and brightening a few things up, what we need to do is take a look at the armour, because in the artwork, the armour of this regiment is very dark, almost black. And so to do this, all we need is some black Templar. I'm going to paint it over that silver, so a little bit of the metal shows through to give that slight metallic hint. So to do this, go for a medium-sized brush, and I'm now using a medium layer from Citadel. All you've got to do is get some of this onto a regular palette, and then thin it down with just a touch of water, just to take the edge off this paint. It is a very strong one. So I want to bring it down to around about that point just there, and once you've done so, just make sure you don't have loads and loads on your brush, and then all you got to do is pick a piece of armour at once and just work your way around it. So for example, the helmet, pick a starting point on the side, just apply some of that contrast paint and just start moving it around so it coats the whole thing evenly, and then just let it settle and dry. So for this, what we're looking to do is to paint it onto the helmet, so around here, but also do the shoulder plates and also the armour on the hands as well. Once that contrast paint is completely dry, you'll have appropriately dark metal in all the armour, and so now we can move on to the next phase of painting the miniature, which is to do a little bit of layering to brighten some details up. And the first part we need to do for this is that great coat, and to layer this we need to return to the original colour for it. So the Fang is the one to use here. Now to apply it, I'm going to be using the medium layer brush from Citadel for lots of control, because what we're looking to do with this colour is to paint the raised flatter areas and avoid the deeper recesses, so we retain that definition from the wash, but also make it a little bit brighter. So to do that, make sure your paint's thinned down as ever, just bringing it down to around about this kind of point here. You see, I'm just checking to make sure it flows well onto the palette, and so I've got lots of control over it. And once you've done so, then all you got to do is start looking for those raised up areas. So if we look on the coat, around this part where it goes over the leg just here, you can see those recesses where there's creases. So what I'm looking to do is to paint on the flatter areas such as around there, so a thin coat around that point to make it a little bit brighter. But where it dips in and goes darker there, just skip past that and go around the outside where it's raised up, and carry on again towards the top of the crease on the other side along there. So this way, see, I'm retaining that definition, but making the colour brighter. I've finished that layering on the greatcoat now, and you can see it does brighten it up whilst also emphasising all those deeper recesses and really bring out the texture of it too. And with that done, we can now move on to layering the next detail, which is going to be the trousers. And for this, once again, we need to return to the original colour, so in this case, Mechanicus Standered Grey. Now the application is going to be just like the previous step, only for this I'll just switch to a smaller brush just for a little bit more control. So I'm down to a small layer brush from Citadel for this. But the process is just the same, but just thinning the paint down until it's about this kind of consistency here. And then all you've got to do is start applying it onto the raised areas and looking for those recesses in the creases and avoiding them. So in the case of this trouser leg just here, we're looking at kind of going down to the knee here, but you can see the creases appearing just beneath it. So when we get to those parts, just avoid the darker areas and only concentrate on the raised up lighter areas. With that done to the trousers, we can then layer with one more colour, which is going to be Karak Stone for the gas mask and also the bedroll. And once this is done, we then got a few finer details we can paint in, starting out with a pitch black. So here I'm going to use some matte black from the Army Painter. This will be for the eye lenses on the gas mask. And then after that, we have an optional step, and that is to add the regimental patch on the collar of the greatcoat. If you want to do this for this regiment, what you'll need is a dark red. So here I'm going to use some Khorne Red. But first of all, we need that Karak Stone, and to apply it I'm sticking to the small layer brush here from Citadel. And with this, what we need to do is the same process as what we just did on the greatcoat and the trousers, but concentrating on the gas mask and also the bedroll. Don't worry about the putties for now, because that's going to be staying a little bit darker. Instead, we just want to concentrate mainly on the face. So in this case, what we're looking at doing is painting it onto those raised areas, being careful of the recesses, especially where it meets that little metal ring going around the eye lens, just following down there and on the side as well. Now when it comes to the bedroll, just approach this like normal fabric, so what we're looking for is those raised flatter areas, such as around here, skipping the recesses and the creases and carrying on again on the other side. Once that's done, you're then ready to move on to your pitch black. So here I'm using some matte black, and again with that small layer brush, what we need to do is just very carefully move in to just pick out the eye lenses. So this area just there, and the same on the other side. And then finally, we can move on to an optional step, which is to add the regimental patch on the side of the collar. Now it goes on this side, and sometimes it's a little bit tricky to get to, especially with the head turned this way, but essentially with Khorne Red, all we've got to do is carefully move in and paint just a little triangle right on this side of the collar, there, like that. And there we go, with that done, the miniature's looking great at this stage, and if you're painting lots of these Krieg soldiers, you might even want to leave it there and just get them onto the tabletop by just painting in the base, and then you're ready to go. But if you want to make them really stand out, then what you need to do is add some highlights, and that's what we're going to do now. And this is entirely optional, but if you do want to do it, it makes sense to start out with the main colour of the miniature, which is that blue greatcoat. Now in the case of this, because we started out with the Fang, what we need is a lighter shade for the highlights. So here I'm going to use some Russ Grey, but if you're painting a different regiment, it's the same sort of thing, just pick a colour that's a little bit lighter than that original one you went for. Anyway, I'm going to be applying Russ Grey now, and to paint it on I'm going to be using that small layer brush from Citadel, because with this what we're looking to do is to pick out the peaks of the creases and also the edge of the fabric as well. So the real trick to getting this right is to make sure the paint's thinned down correctly, so down to about this sort of point here. You can see I'm testing it on the palette. It's flowing very easily from the brush just there. Now whilst it might look like there's not a lot of paint on there, there's the right amount to get the sort of result of what we want here, because this way we've got that control and that accuracy. And what we need to do first of all is look for the edges of the coat, so you can see the turn back where it's kind of lifted up around there. In this case, just approach using the side of your brush and just very gently skim along. So just brace yourself so you're nice and steady, holding the brush about 45 degrees from the flat there, and just work your way around, gently just skimming along to get a nice highlight on those areas. Same on the part along here where it's buttoned up, going all the way up to the collar around here. Now this works for all the edges of the coat, but there are the creases to pick out too, and when it comes to these, just angle the model so you're nice and comfortable, and you're painting in a downward kind of motion when you're sort of swooping the brush there like that, and just look for the edge where it stands out the most. We've got that sharpest part on the crease, and just very gently follow it down using the tip of your brush there like that, to get a nice highlight following along that area. With that greatcoat highlighted, we can now move on to the next important colour that we need to highlight, which is going to be the Karak Stone details that we originally base coated using that colour, because this includes the gas mask, which, being the face, is a focal point of the miniature, so it is important we highlight this. Now for this, what we need is some Ushabti Bone, and to apply it I'm once again going to use that small layer brush, and with this, again, what we're looking for is kind of the ridges, so the raised areas, corners, anything like that. In the case of the gas mask, there's just kind of like a sort of an edge line that runs down the side of the face on either side, so what we're looking for is that detail. So the area I'm talking about is this kind of little ridge that we've got that goes just beneath the eye. Now the easiest way to get hold of this is actually going to be to turn the model right upside down, so it's a nice natural movement to highlight it and then just follow it along. So it's just a little bit there and then directly beneath the eye lens right there, giving that highlight following around that part there like that. Now, in addition with this colour, we can also highlight the other details we originally base coated with this colour, including the bedroll. So again, we're looking for the edges and also the tops of creases. So along there, for example, and a little bit along there. And also we've got the putties down here. And for these, the best way to do these is to, again, turn the model so it's kind of sideways on like that, and then just do this downward motion just to go along the edges. So just kind of along those areas there like that. With all that Karak Stone detail now highlighted, we're ready to move on to highlighting the next area of colour, which is going to be those trousers. And for this, we just need a shade that's a little bit lighter than what we originally had there. So in this case, I'm going to use some Dawnstone. Now after that, we've got some detail on the chest to do. And here what we need is some Corax White, first of all, followed by a very small amount of Scarlet. And then finally, we're going to use some Mornfang Brown to highlight the boots. But first of all, what we need is some Dawnstone, and to apply it, I'm going to do the exact same technique as what we did on the greatcoat. So again, using that small layer brush, what we're looking for is the tops of all the creases that appear on that area of detail. So you don't need loads of this, just need to make sure it is thin nicely so that it flows well from your brush, and that you have a good point there. And then you just need to, first of all, look for those creases which kind of appear on the inside of the leg just there. So to access these, remember just to turn the model so you're comfortable, so you can reach those parts, and just paint that straight line down, following the very top of those details. So we're looking at areas just there, and then this one down here as well. In addition, at this stage, be sure just to add a small line just along here for a highlight along the knee. Next up, we need a very small amount of Corax White, and this is for this little dial that we've got here. It's actually the background of it. We just need to very gently poke it into that recessed part right behind the dial on top. Once you've got that white, you can then move on to Scarlet, and this is to pick out the little point that's on the dial. So we're looking at this little raised up area just in there. Now, in addition, if you've painted the regimental patch on the collar, you can highlight that as well by just applying a highlight just like you would on the greatcoat, just along the front of it. And with that done, we can then move on to Mornfang Brown, and with this we can highlight the boots. And all we've got to do here is just pick out the very end of them, so kind of along there, just going around either side as well. And there's a little crease down the middle, be sure to highlight that as well. With that, the boots are complete, and so now we can move on to highlighting the remaining details on the miniature. And for this, first of all, what we're going to need is some Skrag Brown to highlight all that webbing and the backpack. Then after that, we can move on to highlighting the black details, and for this, we'll need some Mechanicus Standered grey. With that done, we can move on to metallics, and here what we'll need is some Liberator Gold for the brass details first of all, and then some Stormhost Silver for all the silver details. But first of all, we need that Skrag Brown, and to apply it, I'm once again going to use the small layer brush, because the technique I'm going to be doing here is very much the same as what we've just been doing on the other colours. So all we've got to do is make sure it's nicely thinned and under control, and then we're looking for the edges of these areas of detail. And in the case of the webbing, a lot of it's quite fine and tricky to get to, but also a lot of it can be accessed using the side of the brush. So for example, this strap going down here over the shoulder, just very gently down there and down there. The detail on the chest as well, we can very easily access that by going all the way around. So you see, wherever possible, just use the side of your brush like that. But if you can't quite reach it, just angle the model so you're painting downwards towards yourself and just follow that line all the way down. With that, all the webbing's done, and so now we can move on to highlighting the black detail using Mechanicus Standered grey. And once again, we're looking for the sharper edges, so wherever possible, use the side of your brush just to skim along those parts. But if you can't quite reach that, remember just to paint in that downward motion, and really take your time, especially on the rifle, making the highlights as neat as possible on here. With that black completed, we can now move on to highlighting the metallics, starting out with the brass, and for this what we need is some Liberator Gold. Once again, we're looking for raised edges and corners, and just very gently skim along the side of them with your brush just to help them stand out a little bit more. And finally, we can highlight all the silver detail using Stormhost Silver, and this goes for both tones of it, including the lighter silver that we got on the weapons and the darker silver on the armour. And just take your time applying it as an edge highlight, just working your way around these edges, such as along here on the helmet. And if you want to, you can even add a few little scratches onto the helmet to give the impression of some use. So just very quickly, a few little flicks of the brush just to give a few little lines of this silver and places there like that. In addition, at this stage, now is the time to pick out the buttons on the greatcoat as well, and for this, all you need to do is just dot the colour just to the raised detail there like that. And with that, the metal is highlighted and the miniature is, well, now just about ready to be based. But before we do any of that, we're just going to add one effect to it onto the bottom of the coat and down his trousers, just to make it look like he's been fighting in a really rough environment. So a really muddy environment, perfect for Krieg. For this, what we need to do is to pick out two browns. First of all, a medium brown, and here I'm going to use some Gorthor brown, then a darker brown, and here I'm going to use some Dryad bark. Now to apply these, what I'm going to be doing is kind of dry brushing, kind of stippling them, sort of at the same time to get a sort of a rough appearance to them. So for this, I've gone for a small dry brush from Citadel because of the softer bristles these brushes have. And all you've got to do is just get some of the paint and work it into the brush as if you're about to be dry brushing it on. So I'm going to bring it down to around about that point there when you're getting that sort of result on the tissue. Once you're doing so, what we need to do is look towards the bottom of the miniature and just start kind of dotting it on around this sort of area here, just like really focusing it and building it up, just stippling away like that, so you start to get that smooth browner colour appearing towards the bottom. And what we're looking at doing is this towards the base of it, so we're looking at this kind of level of the coat and then also on the legs as well, so just up to around about here, just beneath the knees. Once you've built up that colour to around about this point, you're then ready for a darker brown. In this case, Dryad bark's what I'm using, and for this I'm just going to apply it in the same sort of way. So prepared in the same way, but this time I'm just going to focus it a little bit further towards the bottom of the coat, so just down there, so the colour gets darker towards the base of it, and the same further around the miniature, so not going quite up to the knee this time, just a little bit further down, so around about there. Now with this done, the miniature is then ready for its transfers and then ready to be based, and as ever, it's entirely up to you how you base it, but in this case, I'm going to go for a muddy battlefield base. And with the base now fully painted, this Deathcore Infantryman is ready to charge directly at the enemy guns, ready to bayonet them, and perhaps even hit them with a shovel as well. So as you've seen, painting these soldiers is actually very straightforward, and remember, if you want to paint a different regiment from what we painted in this video, then you can easily do so by just substituting in the colour for the greatcoat. But all the same techniques and stages will work just fine. So have fun painting your soldiers, and we'll see you again very soon.